Good day everyone, my name is Jake Olympus Pagador from CA 200 Section G. Today I am going to report about institutional based correction. First, let me read the discussion. In 2018, the Philippines held the 6th highest prison population out of 21 Asian countries as part of 2019. The Philippines population rested at 108.31 million people, and 215,000 of those people were incarcerated. Therefore, the Philippines has an incarceration rate of about 200 per 1,000 citizens. There are 933 prisons running in the Philippines. Unfortunately, they are mismanaged and overcrowded. Next, 5 facts about the Philippines incarceration system. First is severe overcrowding. Manila City Jail, the largest jail in the Philippines, is split into dorms that safely house 170 inmates. Currently, these dorms around 500 people. Similarly, a room designated for 30 people holds about 130 in the Quezon City Jail. This severe overcrowding in prisons leads to illness and death tolls in the thousands. So, the Philippines has the highest jail occupancy rate in the world, exacerbated by the Duterte's governments. War on drugs is the main reasons why jails become overcrowded, and in which hundreds of thousands of people have been jailed since July 2016, when Rodrigo Roa Duterte becomes an elected president of the Philippines. Since March 2020, the arrest and temporary detention of thousands of people for violating curfews, illegal drugs related, have further crowded police lockups and jail. And next, the free trial detainees. Free trial detainees, according to the world's prisons, 75.1% of incarceration within the Philippines incarceration systems are free trial detainees. Unfortunately, many people are serving sentences without conviction. Pre-trial detention is found in the judicial system all over the world. In countries like Philippines, people may serve time that outweighs their crime. On average, prisoners in the Philippines are detained for 9 months without being sentenced. So, the Philippines has the clubhouse recognition of having the longest pre-trial detentions in the whole world. Inmates stay in jail for an average of 528 days before they are convicted or acquitted. In some cases, inmates stayed in detention for 10 years only to be acquitted. In fact, it takes longer for an inmate to stay in temporary detention centers and jails than in prisons. For example, a prison convicted for 12 years usually had stayed in jail for 8 years already, while undergoing trial will serve the remaining 4 years in prison. Thus the key decision point is not whether an accused or convicted or not, but rather whether one is bailed out or not, being denied bail. In the Philippines is a tantamount to a serving sentence. Third, high death tolls. About 5,200 inmates die annually at the New Bilibid Prison or NBP, according to Ernesto Tamayo Hospital Medical Chief. These deaths are due to overcrowding, dirty living conditions, and inmate violence. At the 2019 Philippine Senate hearing, Tamayo said that there were uncontrollable outbreaks of pulmonary tuberculosis. In addition to overcrowding, poor living conditions, and inmate violence, NBP lacks nutritional foods and basic health care. On account of these living conditions, Tamayo reports that at least one prisoner dies at NBP each day. Thankfully, prisons employees are working to reduce overcrowding in the Philippines prisons. Human rights advocates have also called for release for vulnerable inmates hoping to protect them in poor living. So, more than 5,000 inmates at maximum security jails in the Philippines, or around 20% of all inmates die each year. Filipino prison hospital chief has claimed Ernesto Tamayo of the National Bilibid Prison in Muntinlupa, a few kilometers south of Manila, said that mortality rate is 20% for the jail's population of around 26,000, with most of the deaths occurring due to infectious disease in overcrowded cells. Fourth, vigilant justice. In 2016, Duterte told the public, "If you know any addicts, go and kill them yourself." Together, the Philippines police force and unidentified gunmen have killed 7,000 known drug dealers users since Duterte's presidency in 2016. The Philippines' war on drugs has created the belief that extrajudicial violence and murder are necessary to fight crime, but the human rights Watch turns the narrative around Duterte. They are publishing information about the vigilante justice in the Philippines. So, what is the vigilante? So, vigilante is a person who takes the law into his or her hands. So, as an example of vigilante is a person who makes his own mission to kill murderers. In addition, a new frontline has opened in the wars on drugs in the Philippines since May, when new President Rodrigo Duterte won the election. More than 700 suspected drug executed by police and vigilantes, and 600,000 users have given themselves up to the authorities. The killings came after President Duterte vowed to wipe out all crime within months of his inauguration, and called for drug users to be put behind bars or below ground. Duterte has repeatedly urged law enforcement agencies, the public at large, and even the communist-led New People's Army or NPA to kill people suspected or dealing or trafficking drugs, as well as people who use drugs. The results has been devastating. Men and women have been gunned down in the streets, gagged and bound in the pools of their own blood, with crudely down signs left at the scenes declaring themselves as opposers. These executions have occurred without any kind of trial opened by masked or motorcycles, or the riding in tandem, acting only on hearsay. The rule of law has disintegrated and hundreds have killed and died as a result. Many more are sure to follow. Next is number 5, corruption. In September 2018, the public learned that a woman was told her husband's sentence would be shortened if she paid 50,000 pesos or $970. Later that year, senators stated that inmates could live like a kings for a fee. This information led to further allegations. Prison workers and officials were taking bribes to bring and distribute contrabands to inmates. The contrabands These questions are included cigarettes, cell phones, and televisions. Inmates who cannot afford better life within the prisons are stuck in overcrowded and dirty rooms. These inmates have a higher rate of becoming ill and of death. Now that the corruption has been unearthed, officials are taking steps to weed it out, one person at a time. So, prison servers are one of the worst environment for corruption in all spheres of public life. They combine large numbers of people held against their will and deprived of access to a normal range of goods and services. Looked after by a relatively small number of prison officers who often are poorly paid of variable quantity. Integral connection with crime and organized crime. Tight funding and precludes many movements, limited external security, and little public interest in what goes on inside. Police raid a large prison complex revealed the lavish accommodations enjoyed by several drug lords. The luxury cells included jacuzzis, syrup bars, and marble-tiled bathrooms. Police also uncovered methamphetamines, inflatable sex dolls, and small concert stage complete with strobe lights and disco balls. And next, let's go to next slide, which is the earliest records of prisons came from the first millennia BC, located on the area's mighty ancient civilization of Mesopotamia and Egypt. During those times, prisons were almost always stationed in the underground dungeons where guilty or suspected criminals spent their lives either waiting death sentence or a command becoming as slaves, often working as a galley slaves. So, as you have seen in the picture besides, this picture shows what is underground dungeons look like. A prison or a jail or an cell underground. So, primary source of detention were not just dungeons, high walls or bars, but simple wooden blocks that were attached to their feet. Ancient Roman Empire continued to use harsher methods. The prisons were built almost exclusively underground, with tight and claustrophobic passageway and cells. Prisoners themselves were held either in simple cells or chained to the walls for life or for time. As slavery was accepted norms in those days, majority of prisons that were not sentenced to death were sold as slave or by Roman government as workforce. So, ancient Roman Empire is very known in terms of harsher methods, in terms of punishment or so one of the famous uses of slaves during Roman Empire, which is what we call gladiators. So as you have seen in the picture, you can see men fighting against wild animals in an arena, while many people surrounded by many people who watching them fighting against different kinds of animals. So that is what we call the gladiators. In addition to a fighting arena, so when we say fighting arena, it is a place where the gladiators fighting against the wild animals and surrounded by many people who enjoying watching them, how they are going to defeat the wild animals. In addition to fighting arena, sometimes after lifetime or training in special gladiator training houses or lodges, many slaves were tasked as a support workforce that enabled smoother run of popular gladiator business. So gladiator during the Roman Empire was become a business. The most famous gladiator battleground, the mighty Colosseum Arena in Rome, had a slave army of 224 slaves that worked daily as a power source of a complicated network of 24 elevators that transported gladiators and their wild animals opponents from underground dungeons to the arena floor. Next, the conditions in European prisons remained harsh until English royalty started being involved their justice system. Henry II commissioned the construction of first prison 1166 together with the first draft of English legal system that used concept of jury. One of the most historic prison legislation was introduced in 1215 when King John signed Magna Carta. So, Magna Carta stated that no man could be in prison without trial. So, in this time, so this is the year which the legislation was changed because of King John. No man could be in prison without trial. Next is the age of modern prison. The age of modern prison that we know today started with the several prisons reforms in 19th century England. During that time, prisoners started receiving more care. Concept of rehabilitation was introduced, and governments around the world, especially in UK and US, started considering their views on solitary confinement, which was primary source of the increased number of insane, suicidal, and catatonic prisoners. With the rise of the industry between 16th and 18th century, English prisons are become overcrowded, and new penal measures started being implemented, military pardon and penal transportation. During the end of 18th century, over 50,000 prisoners were transported from England to penal colonies in North America and Australia. France even continued their practice of penal colonies until the middle of 20th century, most notably in French Guiana and its infamous prisons Devil Island. And Russia also used penal colonies in Prussian Northeast Siberia. Wars that engulfed the world in the beginning of the 20th century brought the formation to large amount of wars, prison camps, and concentration camps. Most famous example of this type of prisons happened during World War II, when Nazi government formed over 30 detention centers in which political opponents, Jews, gypsies, criminals, and other detained without judicial process. Majority of them was eventually killed on an unprecedented massive scale that is today estimated to be between 11 and 17 million people. During the end of 20th century, modern prison system was finalized. Concept of probation service was introduced in 1991, and 3 years before that, prison intended solely for the holding of inmates in permanent isolation was formed. Those supermax prison become widespread across the entire United States, with over 40 of them are being active. In the year of 2005, inmates in those prisons are held in 23 hours long period of cell isolation with occasional communal yard time work, educational program, and meals in cafeteria. As of 2006, it is estimated that over 9 million people are in prison worldwide, with the United States leading the rate of incarceration. So, different types of prisons, antiquity times. So, prisons of Sonar Fort, prison of Yuma, prison cell of Melbourne, Gold, Australia. So, other different types of prison: minimum security, low security, medium security, maximum security, supermax security, ankle bracelet, for home detention, federal houses, juvenile option, military prison, podular jails, psychiatric prisons, and federal versus state. So let's going to discuss about minimum security first. A minimum security prison may also be referred to as federal prison camp or FPC. Most of the people in a minimum security prisons are white-collar criminals, which means they commit something like fraud or embezzlement. White-collar criminals are sent to minimum security prison, where they'll live in a dorm-style atmosphere. There are also fewer guards here, and prisoners enjoy more personal freedoms that a higher security facilities. These facilities also have little to no perimeter fencing. So, the term white-collar crime refers to the financial motivated, non-violent, or directly violent crime committed by individuals, business, and government professionals. Example of white-collar crimes: securities fraud, embezzlement, corporate fraud, and money laundering. Minimum security institution, also known as federal prison camp, have dormitory housing, are relatively low staff to inmate ratio, and limited or no perimeter fencing. These institutions are work and program oriented. A number of BOF institutions have a small minimum security camp adjacent to the main facility. These camps, often referred to as satellite prison camps, or provide inmate labor to the main institution and off-site work programs. And next is low security. Low security federal correctional institution, or FCI, have double fence perimeter, most dormitory or cubicle housing, and strong work and programs components. The staff to inmate ratio in this institution is higher than in minimum security prison. Who goes to federal correctional institution? Federal inmates at the low security level span virtually all backgrounds and crime categories. These include drug offenders, white-collar offenders, and others. Low security prisons inmates typically have less than 20 years remaining on their sentence. Prisoners may have history of violence, but those caught fighting, drinking, using drugs, or committing other serious infractions are typically transferred to medium security federal prison. Next is medium security. Medium security prison are the standard facilities used to house most criminal and features cage style housing, armed guards, and much more regimented daily routine, where prisoners are expected to work, attend educational programs, or practice in other activities that prepare them for release. Finally, there are prisons that have a very low level for security for those who present no threat to public safety. So, what types of inmates are in medium security prison? Medium security prison, federal prison, house all manners of federal inmates. These include inmates convicted of federal drugs offenses, white-collar crimes, sexual offenses, and others. Next is medium security. Medium security prisons are the standard facilities used to house most criminals. They feature cage-style housing, armed guards, and much more regimented daily routine than minimum security, where prisoners are expected to work, attend educational programs, or participate in other activities that prepare them for release. Finally, there are prisons that have a very low level of security for those who present no threats to public safety. Maximum security prisons generally holds prisoners serving long sentences. Maximum security or high security prisons are for dangerous and violent offenders. Everyone in a maximum security prison is considered high risk. The staff keeps a close eye on the inmates under a very high staff to inmate ratio. In this sort of prisons, while there are multi-occupant cells, there are also single-occupant cells in this prison. These types of prisons have more guards than you'll find in a minimum or medium security prison. Those locked up in a maximum security prisons also have very few personal freedoms. The perimeters here are highly secured with either reinforced fences or high walls. Maximum security prisons generally hold prisoners serving long sentences. These prisoners have committed murder, robbery, kidnapping, treason, or other serious crimes. High stone walls or strong chain fences around most maximum security prison. And next is supermax security. Supermax security prison is a facility within a maximum security prison. This is where the most dangerous and hardened criminals are kept, and it also where the inmates who have trouble being controlled are kept. The main goal of supermax facility is to keep everyone safe, including the inmates, prison staff, and the public. This is where inmates will be sent if they are shown violent behavior against staff member or another inmate, or they seem to have trouble following the rules in order. Lower security facilities. Supermax facility may also house those on death row or inmates who are part of another types of special population. A super maximum security or supermax or administrative maximum prison is a control unit. A unit within prisons which represents the most secure level of custody in the prison system of certain countries. The objective is to provide long-term segregated housing for inmates classified the highest security risk in the prison system and those who pose an extremely serious threat to both national and global security. And next, number 6, ankle bracelet for home detention. In various jurisdictions across the US, electronic ankle bracelets are used instead of putting a defendant in custody. The criminal justice has issues with things like overcrowding and high cost of keeping a person in jail, which is why ankle bracelet is a great alternative for some criminals. Ankle bracelet are used to ensure the individual stays at the home or within certain areas, such as work or school. Ankle bracelets are sturdy and waterproof, and they can't be removed by wearer. The department uses two types of electronic monitoring: the radio frequency and global positioning system, or GPS, to monitor the offender's compliance with the conditions of their sentence or order. Next is federal houses. A federal house is a home for people who would otherwise be in either jail or prison. Halfway houses may be run either locally by the state or federally. Prisoners who are either serving an alternative of sentence or who have been released into halfway house from jail can be found here. For the most part, an individual in a halfway house falls into three designations. First, they are receiving help for the addiction to drugs or alcohol. Second, they are receiving for a mental health disorder. And third, they need to learn how to re-enter life following incarceration. Juvenile options. A person who is under the age of 18 years old is legally considered as juvenile. Juveniles are not put into the same prison as adults. Instead, they put into facility programs that specifically for juveniles. There are several types of sentencing options in juvenile court, ranging from incarceration to non-incarceration options. So, there are in the Philippines, in our country, if there is a juveniles, it will be separated. It will not be brought to prisons as one same as an adults, but it is brought by the DSWD or the Department of Social Welfare and Development. They are the one who will cater the juveniles. They are the one to correct or rehabilitate a child who is commit or violate the law. And next, incarceration options include home confinement or house arrest, placement with a relative or in a foster home, a juvenile detention facility or probation following a stay in juvenile detention facility, or on rare occasions, a juvenile may be sent to an adult prison based on the specific circumstances of the case. There are several non-incarceration options too. This includes verbal warnings, fines, required counseling or community service, electronic monitoring via arrest or ankle bracelet, or probation. Next is a military prison. Military prisons, the different branches of military, each have their own prison that used to house any military personnel who has broken the law, specifically if that crime impacts national security. Military prisons are also used lock-up prisoners of wars. Purpose of military prison is military prisons are used various to house prisoner of war, unlawful combatants, those whose freedom is deemed national security risk by the military or national security, and members of the military found guilty for a serious crime. Next is podular jails. A podular jails, also sometimes referred to as direct supervision jail, is different from the jails that rows of jails. In a podular jails, the inmates are housed in units or pods that are built around a common interface. This allows for more consistent and direct supervision of the inmates for the sake of keeping negative behavior at bay. This isn't the type of incarceration that would be used for dangerous criminals because there are too much interactions that other inmates with could lead to problems. Podular jails design features as a master control area in the center cells and program areas surrounding the perimeters in a circular or pie-shaped layout. Staff doesn't need to run down corridor to see what happened because there are clear sight lines for observations of inmates and activities of all times. Cameras simply supplement direct supervision but aren't the sole source of monitoring. Next is psychiatric prison. When a person breaks the law but is considered to be mentally unfit or traditionally prison, they will be sent to a psychiatric prison. These prisons resemble hospitals, and it's where the prisoners can get treatment for their mental disorders instead of simply confining the inmate. Psychiatric prisons also strive to help them rather. So here in the Philippines, if a mental ill person commits crime, he or she will be brought to a mental hospital in order to be rehabilitated or give some treatment in order to cure his mental disorder. So, psychiatric facilities in the Philippines are located in Cagayan Valley Medical Center, Cagayan City, second, Davao Mental Hospital in Davao City. Third, Divine Mercy Psychiatric Hospital in Mandayulong City. Fourth, Makati Medical Center, Makati City. Fifth, National Center for Mental Health in Mandaluyong. And sixth, the University of Santo Tomas Hospital, España, Manila. Can a mentally ill person go to jail? So, if the time of a sentencing the defendant is severely mentally disabled and in need of treatment, he or she will be provided treatment either in prison or a mental health facility. Upon his or her release, the defendant could be placed on probation or parole. So, what are psychiatric prisons called? Psychiatric hospitals, also known as mental health units or behavioral health units, are hospitals or wards specializing in treatment of severe mental disorders such as schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, and major depressive disorder. And next, federal prison versus state. Federal prison are run by Bureau of Prisons, which is part of the DOJ. If the crime is federal, most criminals will be put into federal prisons instead of state prisons. However, violent crimes, even if they are federal, often end up with the criminals in the state prison. There are more state prisons in the United States than the federal prisons, and each state has its own prison system. While the state prison system may be similar to one another, they tend to have some of their own unique traits. Each state is able to determine how their own correctional system will be run. On one area where federal prisons differ greatly from state prison is regarding the length of the sentence. Since federal prisons don't allow paroles, inmates heartened spend more time here than in state prison, where it's more likely parole will be followed. What is the difference between state and federal prison? So, the main difference between state and federal prisons is the government bodies that operate them. The state prison is operated by the state government. On the other hand, the federal prison is operated by federal government. Federal prison camps house the lowest security federal inmates. Camp inmates are generally low-level, non-violent offenders who do not have significant history of institutional disciplinary violence or escape. Additionally, inmates must have less than 10 years remaining on their sentence. So, next, religion roles in prison. Religion's value in prison is often about its contribution to the individual growth or development of a particular inmate. The focus is to perceive the role of religion in helping lower the chances of recidivism among inmates. Other reasons it is focuses on the immediate value that religions have for inmates through their help in their coping and survival. The influence and practice of religion in the correctional setting is as old as the history of prisons. Initial entry of religions into prisons was probably carried out by religious men who themselves are imprisoned. The Bible stories such as prisoners include Joseph and Jeremiah in the Old Testament, and John the Baptist, Peter, John, and Paul in the New Testament. Beginning in the days of Constantine, the early Christian church granted asylum criminals who would otherwise have been mutilated or killed. Although this custom was restricted in the most countries by the 15th century, releasing prisoners during Easter time and request by church authorities to pardon or reduce sentences for offenders remained for centuries, with the latter still in existence in modified form. So, to make that story short, so religion is very important in prison. So it helps prisons to be enlightened, especially in the Word of God. So they are giving chances. So by hearing the Word of God, they will be enlightened, their mind. So it can help them to be rehabilitate mentally. So how to live life with God, and in that instance, so it will help them to change their mind the way they are going to live their life with good purpose. Next, prison timeline in history. 2nd century BC records found at many Egyptian and Mesopotamian archaeological sites prove the existence of earliest prison in the world. On 600 BC, the remains of the oldest known prison can be traced to the ancient room under Carcer Mamertino or Mamertine prison, originally designed as a cistern for water. This ancient used for more than half millennia. One of its most famous prisoners was Gallic chieftain Vercingetorix, executed at 46. (200 AD), at the beginning of the new millennium, one of the oldest prisons outside the Roman Empire was found in the Israel town of Tiberias. On 1166, English King Henry II commissioned the construction of the first prison together with a new legal system that used concept of jury. In 1215, John signed Magna Carta, which started new age of legal system in England. This historic document stated that no man could be imprisoned without trial. In 1400s, England establishes houses of correction which housed growing number of homeless people. On 1600s, growing number of English prisoners gave birth to the military prison. On 1700s, environment of industrial revolutions and Napoleonic wars greatly increased a number of incarcerated people in England. In 1777, Englishman John Howard published influential book that proposed prison reform. In 1786 to 1791, over 50,000 prisoners was transported from England to the North America containment and after the start of War of Independence to penal colony of Australia. On 1791, prisoners Jeremy Bentham created designs for his perfect prisons where government could spy on unknowing inmates. On 1815, Elizabeth Fry fought for prison reform solutions of the problem of overcrowding women's prisons and children's correction centers. On 1877, Prisons Act brought all prisons under the rule of UK government. On 1829, Eastern State Penitentiary in Philadelphia started enforcing solitary confinement in an effort to rehabilitate its prisoners. On 1835, prisons inspectors first started working in UK together with the first prison volunteers teachers. In 1993, modern UK prison service was formed. In the year 2002, administration of the American President George Bush formed the famous Guantanamo Bay detention camp which held many war suspects from war in Afghanistan, Iraq, and 9/11 terrorist incident. In year 2005, American called over 40 supermax facilities who all enforce constant 23 hours period of isolation. And next, correction as component of criminal justice system. The term corrections and correctional are words describing a variety of functions typically carried out by government agencies involving punishment, treatment, supervision of persons who have been convicted of crimes. So, correction is a branch of criminal justice system concerned with the custody, supervision, rehabilitation of a criminal condition, of criminal offenders. So, when we say correction, it is an act of rehabilitating a criminal or an offender who commits a crime. So, next, correctional administration. The study and practice of system management of jails, prisons, and other institutions concerned with the custody, treatment, and rehabilitation of criminal offenders. So, what is punishment first? So, punishment is the imposition of the undesirable or unpleasant outcome upon a group or individual meted out by an authority in context ranging from child discipline to criminal law as a response and deterrent to a particular action or behavior that is deemed undesirable or unacceptable. So, treatment is to help criminals enhance their ability to help themselves. They focus on specific types of offenders such as sex offenders, violent offenders, and drug addicts. Now, most people believe some treatment programs will help some offenders to prevent recidivism to more extent. So, supervision is a process that involves manager meeting regularly and interacting with the workers to review their work. It is carried out as required by regulation, guidance, standards, inspection, requirements, and of provisions and service. So correctional system, also known as penal system, which refers to a network of agencies that functions related to rehabilitating convicted persons through either institutional-based or community-based correction. Objective of the study includes personal training and management, as well as the experiences of those on the other side of fence, and willing subjects of the correctional process. Corrections in the year 1950s and 1960s are terminology change in U.S. academia from penology. So, institutional correction or institution-based correction, rehabilitation or correctional programs takes place inside correction facilities or institutions such as national penitentiary and jails. So, let's say for example, if one person commits crime, he will be brought to institutional correction, which is inside of a jail or a prison. That is what we call institutional. So non-institutional correction, which is the community-based correction. Rehabilitation or correctional programs takes place within the community. This is otherwise referred as a community-based correction. This approach, the convict will not be placed or released from correctional facility or jails. So, non-institutional or community. So, in this state of correction, in the 5 pillars, which is community, so the BPP or the triple P, which is the pardon, parole, and probation, which is under in the non-institutional correction, which is it is made the rehabilitation of an offender will be made in outside of the institution, which is in the community, but the offender will still be monitored by the law enforcer. So next, institutional corrections refers to the person house, secured correctional facilities. Jail is defined as a place of confinement or inmates under investigation or undergoing trial or serving short-term sentences. Gaol, old name or term of jail. Example of institutional correction. Institutional correction facilities includes prison and jails. Prisons are state or federal housing facilities that confine convict felons, which sentences typically longer than a year. So, what is the advantages of institutional correction? The advantages of institutional correction is community corrections programs offer some distinct advantages. The first is cost issues. Compared to jail and prison, most community programs cost less. Offenders live at home and in the small number of residential programs where the offender lives at the facility and the help subsidize the cost of living. And next is the advantages of institutional correction. The advantages is that the public safety may be compromised. Offenders are more easily to be able to continue criminal behavior than if they confined in jail or prison. With funding going to jails and prisons, resources have not kept pace with community correction growth. So, agencies of the government charged with correctional responsibility. First is BUCOR or Bureau of Correction. So, BGMP. Second, BGMP, Bureau of Jail and Management and Penology. BPP, Board of Pardon and Parole. PPE, Parole, Probation and Administration. Provincial and Sub-Provincial Jails. So, Bureau of Corrections or BUCOR is charged with custody and rehabilitation of national offenders, that is those sentenced to serve a term of imprisonment more than 3 years. And BUCOR, the agency has 7 operating units located nationwide. namely the New Bilibid Prison in Muntinlupa, the Correctional Institution for Women, Iwahig Prison and Penal Farm in Puerto Princesa, Palawan, Sablayan Prison and Penal Farm in Occidental Mindoro, San Ramon Prison and Penal Farm in Zamboanga City, Leyte Regional Prison in Abuyog, Leyte, and Davao Prison in Penal Farm in Panabo, Davao Province. Next is Bureau of Jail Management and Penology, or BJMP, is mandated directly supervise and control administration operation of all districts and municipal jails nationwide with pronged task of safekeeping and development of PDL. So, PDL or persons deprived of liberty. So, BJMP is an agency under the ILG, or Department of Interior and Local Government Unit, so which is responsible in keeping or managing jail, which either in provinces, city, or municipalities. Next is Board of Pardon and Parole. Releases prisoners on parole and recommends the grant of presidential pardons, the parole and provision of supervised rehabilitation parolees, as well as probationers. So they are the one for responsible in this point when a person will be released in the community and will be given a parole or pardon, but they will still be monitoring by the law enforcers. Next is PPA, the Parole Probation Administration, is mandated to conserve and redeem convicted offenders and prisons who are under the probation or parole system. The administration program seeks to achieve the following goals: promote the reformation of criminal offenders and reduce the incidence of recidivism, and province to achieve an alternative to institutional confinement for first-time offenders who are likely to respond to individualized community-based treatment programs. So, imprisonment is defined as an act or confinement of a person in prison, restraint one's personal liberty, forcible detentions among persons or his movement. So, imprisonment. So, if one person commits crime, he will be brought to imprisonment or jail. This is the place where he is going to serve his sentence of his criminal proceedings. So, next, life imprisonment versus reclusion perpetua. So, life imprisonment, a sentence for a crime that is covered by special penal law, and reclusion perpetua, a sentence for a crime that is under revised penal code. Duration is indefinite, and in reclusion perpetua, duration is to 20 to 40 years. And life imprisonment, no accessory penalties, no details on pardon specified. And in reclusion perpetua, comes with accessory penalties, and convicts become eligible pardon after 30 years. For classification of sentence, prisoners: insular or national prisoners, provincial prisoners, city prisoners, and municipal prisoners. Insular or national prisoners, one who is sentenced to a prison term of 3 years and 1 day to death. Provincial prisoner, one who is sentenced to a prison term 6 months and 1 day to 3 years. City prisoners, one who is sentenced to a prison term of 1 day to 3 years. And municipal prisoners, one who is sentenced to a prison term of 1 day to 6 months. So, a simple recall definition of terms: alcoholics, those inmates who suffer from alcoholism or those engaged in improper compulsive intake of alcohol, which may result in physical, social, and behavioral problems. That is what we call alcoholics. Bisexual, those inmates who have sexual interaction with attraction or sexual behavior toward both males and females. So that is what we call bisexual. Chief custodial officer, the personnel in charge of the overall supervision of all custodial functions. Chief City Jail facility or a place of confinement for those inmates who are sentenced with a penalty from 1 day to 3 years imprisonment. So, clustering jails, the designation of municipal, city, or jail or as facility for one or more adjacent municipalities in order to maximize the utilization of personnel and other resources to the host city or municipality is named as district to accommodate inmates and municipalities clustered, which is what we call clustering of jails. Correctional administration, the study of practice of systematic management of jails and prison and other institutions charged with the rehabilitation of criminal escape-prone inmates who are likely to have a tendency to escape from jail facility. And next is district jail, a facility or place of confinement for inmates who coming from a city clustered municipalities who are waiting for undergoing trial or serving sentence for 1 day to 3 years. The next, galleys, long, low, narrow, and single deck ships profiled by sails and usually rowed by criminals, a type of ship used for transportation criminals in 16th century. High-risk inmates in BGMP jails, those considered as highly dangerous or high probability of escaping or being rescued because of gravity of crimes they are accused or have propensity for being troublemakers or initiators of jails, riots, and disturbance, and who acquire a high degree of control and supervision. Institutional correction refers to the means of correcting an individual by placing him in a prison, jail, or treatment until he is ready for his reintegration into the community. Jail escape, an act of leaving from jail of an inmate through unofficial or illegal ways or without legal order from the authorities. That is what we call jail escape. Jail aid, inmate who requires less supervision than other inmates, although he or she may be assigned special tasks. He or she who has no special privilege and is not allowed to work alone or exercise in authority over the inmates. Jailbreak, the escape from jail by more than 2 inmates by a use of force, threat, violence, or deceit, or by breaching security barriers such as by scaling the perimeter fence, by tunneling, or by other similar means, or by burning, distracting of the facility or a portion of the facility with or without the aid of the jail officer. So, jail incident, any untoward or uncommon actions, events, or conditions such as jailbreak, riot, noise barrage, stabbing, or assault upon personnel that occurs in jail and perpetrated by any person which may or may not have followed or depended upon another actions of grave or serious consequences such as escape, injury, death, fire, flood, earthquake, or other calamity which is affects the jail, which is what we call jail incident. Jail warden, person charged with the overall operational and administrative control of jail. Mentally ill, those inmates who suffer from mental ill and afflicted with exhibiting rational and mental soundness. Nuisance contraband, those that may not be classified as illegal under the Philippine laws but are provided by jail rules, example, cell phone, money, or other commodities of exchange such as jewelry, appliances and gadgets, excessive wearing apparels, and sleeping paraphernalia. So, that's all, ma'am, sir. Thank you. Once again, this is Jake Pagador.